Brilliant. Yeah, so croeso pawb, croeso i'r webinar. Welcome to the webinar. I'm Rhys Evans from the Nature Friendly Farming Network. I also farm with my family in Rhydymain near Dolgellau in North Wales. Just a little plug to begin with. If you're not aware of the Nature Friendly Farming Network or the NFFN, we're a farmer-led organisation that champions producing food side by side with nature and the environment. And it's free to join the network. You can do so online in a few minutes. You can join as a farmer member or a public supporter. And by doing so, you get access to our monthly e-newsletter to hear about events and opportunities within the network and any updates on key developments in the world of farming, nature and the environment. And speaking of key developments, delighted to be joined this evening by Dave Ashford, who is the SFS Stakeholder Engagement Manager at the Welsh Government. And Dave is going to provide us an overview of the Sustainable Farming Scheme. And the presentation will last around 40 minutes or so, and then we'll be taking questions at the end. That's the plan, so that the presentation can flow. We'll strive to answer each question. As I mentioned, we might miss some if there's a fair few to go through. And if we do miss any, we'll try to answer them offline and share with participants at a later date. So that's enough from me. I will hand over to Dave. Over to you. Diolch, Dave.
Diolch, Rhys. Good evening, everybody. Rhys, thank you for the invitation. Really glad to be here tonight talking to everybody at the Nature Friendly Farming Network. Good opportunities for me to share some information on the latest developments of the SFS for everyone's benefit. Like I say, Rhys, thanks for the invitation, but also I'd like to thank Nature Friendly Farming Network team wider for being active participants of and active contributors to all of the partnership work we've been doing with stakeholders over the last year or so to get the scheme to where it is at the moment. So thank you for that. Yes, my name's David Ashford. I work in the Agriculture Division of Welsh Government. I'm part of the team developing the SFS. I've been with this team for a number of years now. What my plan is for this evening is to quickly run over what will be happening, effectively the timeline for the next 6 to 12 months, a quick recap of the structure of the scheme and including some of the eligibility requirements, and then I'll focus primarily on the universal actions for the main part of the talk. I apologise, it will be a fairly quick rattle through an awful lot of information. I do talk quite quickly. I'd like to think I can probably answer most questions, most of the usual questions I get in general meetings. I can probably pick up most of those as we go through. Hence, any questions that I do miss, as Rhys said, we'll pick those up at the end. Okie doke, so I'll get cracking. We published a document back in July. In terms of a final scheme description, that document was huge. It was about 200 pages. I appreciate it was a large document. There was a lot of information in there. I can't possibly try and regurgitate 200 pages tonight. And I realize that as busy farmers, you won't have had the time to look at those 200 pages. We did produce a summary booklet, a small A5 summary booklet, which was sent out to all farmers in October. So I hope that you've had, or at least hopefully most of you have had, that small summary A5 booklet, which I've had some feedback was quite useful. So that is the latest version of the scheme. And that's the information we've published this year. What will be happening in the next week or so is that there is another document to be published in the next couple of weeks. There is some formalities that we need to publish before the scheme starts on the 1st of January. So information that nobody ever wants to have to know about, but it has to be there just in case. So information on things like penalties and inspections, that sort of information does need to be published in the next couple of weeks before we go live. But the scheme will be starting on the 1st of January. I fully appreciate that it feels like we've been developing the SFS for getting on what feels like 8 or 9 years, and the scheme will be going live on January the 1st. So a bit of a momentous milestone there after such a long lead in time. So the scheme will start on the 1st of January. It will run on calendar years, so from the 1st of January through to the end of December. As individual farmers, you will not need to do any formal administration until a single application form comes out in March. So even though we're not bound by those European regulations anymore, we are still intending to keep the single application form running from early March through to the middle of May, because those are dates that everybody is familiar with. So you won't have to make any formal declarations about the SFS until you have the SAF. What will happen on the SAF, or effectively the first question you'll see when you get your SAF in March, is are you claiming BPS or are you claiming SFS? You can choose to stay with BPS, that's absolutely fine, albeit that the BPS payments will be tapered down over the next few years. If you choose to stick with BPS, you will see the same question on your SAF the year after in 2027. Are you claiming BPS or are you claiming SFS? Similarly, in 2028, you'll get the same question. So over the next 3 years, you'll have the choice to stay with BPS if you wish to. Currently, there is no intention for BPS to still be available in 2029. So 2028 is the last year of BPS as far as we're concerned. However, if at any point in the next couple of years you choose to claim the SFS, at that point you've effectively retired your BPS entitlements. So once you have claimed SFS, you will not then be able to go back into BPS. So I just wanted to be clear about that you don't have to make any firm choices yet, not until you have your SAF in the spring. You can choose to stick with BPS if you want, but if you do claim SFS, you can't then go back into BPS. And then later on in the year, currently you will receive your BPS payments and advance payment around October time, with a balance payment after all verification has been finished. You have a balance payment in around December time. We are planning on keeping that same payment profile going forwards with SFS. So that's the payment pattern that you're used to, with an upfront payment in October and a secondary payment in December. We plan to stick to the same because, again, those are the details that you are familiar with. So that's a quick run through what will be happening over the next 6 to 12 months. I will just quickly touch on the structure of the scheme to confirm that. I just wanted to touch on a few things. I'm not going to go through every word on these slides because we don't have the time this evening. I just wanted to just very, very quickly just remind everybody of the design principles that we've been using to develop the sustainable farming scheme. And the first one there, that our ambition is for a sustainable farming scheme to support a sustainable, productive agricultural industry in Wales, producing high quality food and other benefits that come from it. It's important I say that. I know we've been in trouble in the past for not talking about food enough. The sustainable production of food has always been at the core of the scheme design, but we can't talk about food without talking about the impacts of climate change and various other pressures on the industry. So it is absolutely built around production of food, but we have a multitude of other aspects that we have to address at the same time. And by the way, I will share these slides with you, Reese, if you want to share them with the network. I'm happy for that. Just to remind everybody of the structure of the scheme, so nothing has changed here. If you have been keeping abreast of our previous consultations and previous discussions, we are looking at a 3-tiered scheme. So starting off with a universal layer, which will be applicable to everybody, with an optional layer on top of that, which is more of a pick and mix, and a collaborative layer for groups of farmers to work together to deliver outcomes that are not possible on a single farm. I will touch on the optional and collaborative at the end of this webinar, but the majority of the discussion will be focused on the universal layer. And I also wanted to touch on the fact that those 3 layers, they sit above what we call the universal code and the regulatory baseline. In that regulatory baseline, there are a number of existing regulations, most of which you'll be familiar with from cross-compliance. We've not created any new regulations as part of this. Well, no new regulations that impact land management. So there are no new regulations. It's just the existing regulations that we've brought together into what we call the SFS regulatory baseline. And as I say, you'll be familiar with most of those. And then sitting next to that, or on top of that, we've got what we call the universal code. So a number of scheme requirements there. They are not regulatory, But if you are participating in the SFS, there are a number of requirements there around the protection of soil, trees and habitats, and other landscape features designed to protect those features and underpin the funded layers of the scheme. In terms of the eligibility for the SFS, so again, these eligibility criteria haven't really changed over the last few versions of the scheme. So you must be undertaking agricultural or ancillary activities on agricultural land in Wales. You must have at least 3 hectares of eligible agricultural land in Wales, or be able to demonstrate at least 550 standard labour hours. Let me break that down a little bit. When we talk about eligible agricultural land, there are a few differences here compared to BPS. So, for example, under BPS, areas like scrub, rocks, trees, woodland, they were not part of the eligible area for BPS. They were not part of the payable area for BPS, but we've changed that. Those features are now part of the eligible payable area for SFS. So if your farm has large areas of rock, trees, scrub, etc., you might now find that the eligible area of your farm has changed, because we bring those areas into the eligible area to recognise the efforts that you put into managing them and to recognise the environmental benefits generated by these areas. So when we talk about 3 hectares of eligible land, note that there is a difference there. Areas such as yards, hard standings, buildings, they were ineligible in BPS and they continue to be ineligible in SFS. So those areas haven't changed. And then the third bullet point you can see on the screen there is have exclusive occupation and management control of the land for at least 10 months of the year. So we have refined that criteria a little bit since the document that we published in July. In terms of the 10 months, they do not have to be a consecutive 10 months. So as long as you've got control of that land when you submit the SAF, and then throughout the rest of the year, as long as you've got the land for 10 months, even if that is in 2 separate installments with a break in the middle, for example, as long as you've got the 10 months, that's fine. We have, at the moment, we are considering an extra refinement to that criteria. The TFA, the Tenant Farmers Association, have been lobbying on behalf of tenant farmers across Wales in the instance that a farmer may not have 10 years in this calendar year. Or sorry, in 2026 when the scheme starts, that you may not have your tenancy may not last for 10 months in the first year. So what we're looking to consider there is if that is the first year of a multi-year tenancy, even if you don't have 10 months available to you in 2026, if that is the first year of a multi-year tenancy, we're considering what exemptions or what derogations we may need to bring in there. For smaller scale producers, so primarily this was brought in for the horticultural industry, where you have smaller scale growers producing an awful lot of food but on a very small physical footprint. We brought in that alternative route in of 550 standard labour hours. Now there are some details that underpin that 550, which I'm afraid I'm not completely familiar with, but there are a standard number of hours there related to the amount of produce you might be producing or the number of livestock that you may be kind of responsible for. So there are some details there that underpin what constitutes that 550 hours. I'm afraid I don't have, I'm not totally familiar with that detail. So I'd have to pick that up separately if that was of interest to anybody. And then just that final sentence on the slide there to remind everybody of that the SFS is a whole farm scheme. So, for example, across the border in England, I know that is not a whole farm scheme, and then farmers pick and choose from a range of options that they think is appropriate for them. Based on stakeholder feedback early on in this design process, it was considered important that we stuck to a whole farm support scheme here in Wales, and the SFS has been designed in that way. Okay, I will switch to the 12 universal actions. I will stick with the English version of the slide. My apologies, I don't speak Welsh. What I'm going to do is rattle through these quite quickly, like I said. There are 12 of them. There are no choice. You don't get to choose. There's no pick and mix option with the 12 universal actions. If they apply to your farm, we will be asking you to undertake that particular action. However, we do understand that not all 12 actions apply to every single farm in Wales. And as we go through the 12, I'll point out which ones don't apply to everybody. For example, if you're an arable-only farm with no livestock, then you wouldn't be expected to do the animal health and welfare action at UA 12. If you don't have a triple SI or other designated sites on your farm, then you wouldn't be required to undertake UA 7, which is a designated site management plan. And there are a few other examples like that as we go through. So I'll highlight the ones that are most likely that don't that aren't applicable to everybody. But even the ones that are applicable to you, there is a fair chance that you won't be starting from scratch. So I do fully appreciate that 12 universal actions looks like a lot, but like I say, they won't all apply to you more than likely, and even the ones that do, you will not be starting from scratch. So here goes, really quick rundown through the 12 universal actions. Number 1, soil health. Everything begins with the soil. It's the most precious thing on your farm other than you, the farmer. So if we're talking about our aspirations for food production, for grass growth, for crops, for reducing flood risk, for rebuilding biodiversity, all of that begins with the soil. What we're asking you to do as part of this universal action is to undertake soil testing on at least 20% of the field parcels on your farm, which are classed as agriculturally improved and receive inputs or lime. So this does not apply to your woodlands or your wetlands or your other habitat areas. We say 20% of the farm, 20% of the parcels. Should you choose to do 100% or more than 20% at least, that's absolutely fine. We are asking you to do at least 20% per year, with the idea then that the entire farm is tested in a 5-year cycle. But as I say, if you want to do more than 20% per year, that's entirely your choice. The minimum range of testing that we're looking for is PK, pH, magnesium, and soil organic matter. Any soil testing you've done over the last couple of years would count towards this. So if, for example, this year or last year, you had support, possibly through Farming Connect, but maybe you did the soil testing yourself. If you've already done, for example, all of the testing on your farm, that would count towards the requirement starting in 2026. And then we wouldn't be asking you to undertake further soil testing then until the next kind of 5-year cycle rolls around. So to be clear, if, for example, you did soil testing this year across the whole farm, we would not be asking you to do any more soil testing until 2029 or whenever the next 5-year cycle would start. We do appreciate that that soil testing that you have done might not include soil organic matter. That is not a general, that's not generally included in the usual soil testing regime. That's fine. If you've done all of your soil testing, but it did not include soil organic matter, that is not a problem. But the next level, the next round of soil testing you do once you enter the scheme, we will be looking for the soil organic matter to be included in that. And the costs of that testing, the costs of all of these universal actions I'm about to go through, they're all built into that universal payment that you would then receive. Once we've done the soil, once you've done the soil testing, the idea being that the results of that soil testing is for your benefit. We are not then asking you to do anything with those results in the universal layer of the scheme. It is designed to give, well, it's firstly, if you are already soil testing, it's designed to recognize that you're already going to that effort. And if you're not already soil testing, the idea is then that you start to benefit from having those results from your soil testing to enable you to make more targeted decisions when it comes to inputs or lime or grazing patterns or using more legumes, for example. Quickly, I'll move on to UA2, integrated pest management. This is not about banning chemical use. It is not about making everybody organic. Again, it's looking for opportunities to reduce chemical use where possible. So if, for example, we are talking about an arable farm, we'd be looking at opportunities for different crop rotations or different seed varieties or maybe the use of companion crops to try and reduce the use of chemicals on that land. If targeted chemical use is needed, that's absolutely fine. We're not banning chemical use as long as those chemicals are used legally, of course. And then we're just looking for a record of those chemicals used. So what product, how much, what date, what quantity, etc. Again, this is all about giving you information to make that chemical use as targeted as possible, with a view to reducing chemical usage where possible. And when we talk about reducing chemical usage, that's for the benefits to, for example, pollinating insects, reducing the risk of pest resistance, which is an emerging problem. So again, it's designed to benefit you in that way and to benefit the industry in that way. Number 3, benchmarking. We have tried really hard to keep this scheme as jargon-free as possible, but I'm afraid with benchmarking, that's not quite possible. By benchmarking, what we mean is to select a certain number of aspects that you can measure and monitor about the farm business to monitor performance and efficiency against those aspects. So, for example, if we're talking about a sheep farm, these elements that we can measure, or these key performance indicators, KPIs, again, I'm sorry about the language, but these KPIs we talk about for a sheep farm, that could be, for example, scanning percentages or daily live weight gain, ewe mortality, lamb mortality, things like that. The benefit of monitoring these things is that over time you can see a pattern building up on the farm. Now, I know as farmers tell me all the time that, of course, you understand this stuff, you have all this information in your heads, and of course you do, and I'm not disputing that. But the benefit of formal benchmarking is that over time you can see those trends building up. Now, hopefully, your mortality is going down. Hopefully, your daily live weight gain is going up. But there can be some really subtle changes that you don't see on a year-by-year basis. And then when you start recording that over a longer period of time, it becomes clearer. And what you can then do is use that information to inform any management changes that you might need to undertake on the farm. Now, what we are not doing with benchmarking data is using it to reduce anybody's payments. We're not using that information to look for issues of non-compliance. In fact, we are not collecting that data at all. That data is yours. It belongs to you. And it's for you to use that information to inform your farm management practices. We are not taking that information in. So please don't think that we're taking this information away to use it for other purposes. Further down this list, I'm going to talk about animal health and welfare, and there's a really important crossover between that benchmarking and the animal health and welfare. So I need to remember to mention that later. But I mentioned some sheep examples there, some cattle examples, for example, could be, age at first calving, herd replacement rates, things like that. So there are different benchmarking aspects available for different sectors, so dairy, arable, horticulture, pigs, poultry, etc. If you choose to do it through Farming Connect, you don't have to do it through Farming Connect, but if you choose to do it through Farming Connect, you can do it on their Farm Data Plus platform, and it's quite straightforward there. In the document that we published in July, we listed I think there's about 80 or 85 different KPIs for the different sectors included in that document. So there's a range of KPIs you can choose from there for each different sector. You choose which KPIs are meaningful for you and which KPIs you feel capable of measuring and monitoring yourselves. You may choose not to do it through Farming Connect, that's fine. So some people will be doing it through their dairy contract or through their supermarket contract, for example. That's completely fine. What's important is that you're undertaking the benchmarking process at all. Number 4, CPD, continuous professional development. Now, I fully appreciate that when we first started proposing CPD, that some farmers were upset by this. We had some feedback that Welsh Government thinks that farmers are not very clever, for example. That couldn't be further from the truth. We know that as farmers, you are already part vet, part midwife, part engineer, part agronomist, part electrician, part lots of other things, all as part of being a farmer. We absolutely recognize that. What this CPD is about is helping you build upon those existing skills to keep abreast of new things happening across the industry. There's new technology available. We are learning more about animal disease. We are learning more about soil science, for example. So it's an opportunity for you to stay abreast of those changes, to benefit you, to benefit your business. The minimum requirement there is for 6 hours per year. That 6 hours can be split between the multiple partners of the business if there are more than one of you. If you're a sole trader, then you'd be looking to do the 6 hours yourself. If there's more than one partner in the business, you can split up those 6 hours between the different partners, if that's appropriate for you. As I say, minimum of 6 hours on a range of subjects. When we first proposed this, the initial proposal was on the Farming Connect online learning only. Again, we had lots of feedback there, so we've made it wide open. It's no longer just Farming Connect, and it's no longer just online learning. So if you're part of any mentoring or discussion groups, for example, that would count towards your CPD. And in terms of the subject matter, that can be anything really related. Well, it can be a whole wide range of aspects related to what we call the Sustainable Land Management Objectives in the Agriculture Wales Act. So anything around the sustainable production of food, around mitigating and adapting to climate change on the farm, enhancing or maintaining the ecosystems on the farm. So all of those different aspects are all applicable to the CPD. Like I say, you can choose to do it with Farming Connect if you want. And if you do want to do it through Farming Connect, you can actually get a head start on that now. So if you wanted to go onto the Farming Connect and use their e-learning modules, there's about 45 different modules available. They're all designed to be 1 hour each. If you wanted to go onto Farming Connect and start some of their e-learning modules now, that would count towards your 6 hours in 2026. So that's one thing you may choose to do now to get out of the way before next year starts. On to habitat maintenance, UA5. So you're probably aware that we still have a requirement in the scheme for at least 10% of each farm to be maintained as habitat to benefit wildlife alongside food production. By habitat, I mean things like your heathlands, your peat bogs, your species-rich hay meadows, for example. If you're around the coast, that could be things like sand dune or salt marsh. So a whole range of different habitat types there. We're looking for at least 10% on each farm. If you have been part of previous schemes, Glass Tier Advanced or Tier Gofal, you may remember that some of the habitat management requirements of those schemes were quite prescriptive, by which I mean we used to stipulate a fixed number of livestock to be allowed into areas of habitat between fixed dates in the calendar. That worked in some places, it didn't work in other places, and where it doesn't work is in the context of our kind of more erratic seasons. So this year we had drought, last year we had floods. So what we've done instead is, rather than giving you those prescriptive numbers, we have instead described the conditions of that habitat that we are looking for, and then said, over to you, Farmer Jones, which livestock do you need? When do you need to bring them in? When do you need to take them out to produce these conditions that we're looking for? To give you much more flexibility, to give you much more ability to make those decisions based on whether it's a wet season or a dry season, or whether you're on flat land in the valley bottom, or whether you're in steep mountain land, for example. So where possible, we've tried to make the delivery of those outcomes much more flexible so that you can adapt as you need to. There is one caveat there, that for very large, well, not for large, but for upland open habitats, that descriptive outcome is much more difficult in those upland parcels, which do tend to be larger and tend to be more of a patchwork of a bit of rock, a bit of bracken, a bit of scrub, a bit of bog, for example. So on those often larger and mixed parcels, it's difficult to do the descriptive outcomes. In those instances, for the moment at least, we have stuck to a maximum winter grazing rate and a minimum summer grazing rate. But hopefully that is something that we can adapt and evolve over the years as the scheme starts to bed in. I should say, we'll touch on payments later, but we have the requirement for at least 10% of the farm to be maintained as habitat. But for all the hectares of habitat that you do have, the payment model reflects all of those hectares. So if you've got 10%, that's great. You've hit the requirement and we will pay you for those 10 hectares. If you happen to have 20, 30, 40 hectares of habitat, you will have additional payments for all of those additional hectares of habitat. So it is important to note that we'll be funding for all of those areas of habitat that you have. So you don't stop counting at 10%, you include all of the habitat that you do have. If you don't have 10% of existing habitat, then UA6 is for you. That's creating temporary habitat. By temporary habitats, I'm talking about things like rough grass margins or fallow margins around your arable crops, or on an all pasture farm, that could be things like herbal lays, establishing herbal lays. It's important to note that these are temporary habitats. So if you're concerned about losing land about losing productive land permanently to habitat, you don't have to worry about that because these are temporary habitats. If you are concerned that the landlord, if you are a tenant farmer and that the landlord will not let you create habitat, again, it's important to reiterate these are temporary habitats, and they can be brought back into the crop rotation. They can be brought back into full production the year after or the season after if you need to. These are not areas that you will be losing from the farm. So we have included a list of 11 temporary habitat types, which you can choose from. You can pick and choose from those 11, depending on what suits your farm, whether you're arable, whether you're all pasture, soil type, etc. So you can choose a pick and mix from those 11 if you need to. And what we have been quite open about is that we will carry on working with stakeholders over the next couple of years to try and grow that list of habitat creation types. So there's as wide a range as possible available for you to choose from to give you maximum flexibility. But if you already have 10%, you don't have to worry about UA6 at all. You don't have to worry about creating new habitat if you already have 10%. Number 7, designated site management plan. By designated site, I'm effectively referring to SSSIs, sites of special scientific interest. If you don't have an SSI in your farm, you can forget about this universal action. It won't apply to you. If you do have an SSSI, what we're asking is that over the next 5 years, you work in partnership with Natural Resources Wales to agree a management plan for that site. And what that management plan will do is effectively, once that management plan is in place, it's effectively your passport into the optional layer of the SFS. So the optional layer is the pick and mix layer above the universal layer. And within that optional layer, there's extra funding for doing extra activities. So if you do have a triple SI on the farm, once you have that triple SI management plan agreed in partnership with the RW, that's your passport into the next layer for additional funding for those extra activities. UA8, hedgerow management. Now, this action has attracted some criticism, and I'll go through that in a moment as to why that is. First of all, of course, we understand that hedgerows come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. So a hedgerow that's just been coppiced or just been laid, through to hedgerows that haven't been cut or managed in many, many years, which are a bit wilder and bigger, and everything in between, of course. This action, UA8 hedgerow management, is aimed at those hedgerows which are cut or trimmed every year. Now, when you cut or trim hedgerows every year, what happens is that we lose the majority, if not all, of the blossom, the seed, the berries, for example, which is such an important food source for wildlife. So what we're asking as part of the hedgerow management action is that hedges are not cut every year, that they're cut every other year at most. And when you do cut, that those hedges are allowed to grow incrementally a little bit wider, a little bit taller, so that that hedge gets bushier, slightly bigger, and as it gets slightly bigger, then it becomes a better windbreak. It becomes a better wildlife habitat. It contains more carbon. All sorts of reasons why it's beneficial to let those hedgerows grow slightly bigger. So we're looking for, like I say, it's the incremental growth every time you do cut and not cutting every year. There are some caveats there, of course. If this is a roadside hedge where the hedgerow has to be cut for safety reasons, then of course that's acceptable. You may have power lines, for example, going over the top of a hedge line, and they might be, and that hedge might be cut by the power company. That, of course, is out of your control, and that's absolutely fine. But where those safety considerations are not relevant, and where you do have management control of those hedges, then we're asking them to be allowed to grow slightly wider, slightly taller, and not cut every year. I fully appreciate that this action has attracted some negative feedback in terms of increased wear and tear on machinery when you do cut, for example. We're well aware of that, and I think that is something that we will need to monitor over the next couple of years. Woodland maintenance, number 9. If you don't have any existing woodland on the farm, this doesn't apply to you, but this is all areas of woodland of 0.1 hectares or bigger. Much like the habitat maintenance, we are not making this as prescriptive as previous schemes. So, for example, there is no mandatory requirement, like we did in the previous schemes, there is no mandatory requirement for those woodlands to be stock excluded. If they are fenced out and that suits you, that's fine. If they are not fenced out, because you require those woodlands for stock shelter or for water access, that's absolutely fine. What we're looking for there is that those woodlands are not overgrazed. And by not overgrazed, I mean we don't want to see the ground being churned up. We don't want to see so many livestock in those areas that the sheep are stripping bark from the trees, for example. I know squirrels do that and deer do that, and that's out of your control. But in terms of livestock, these areas can still be grazed, but we need to avoid those areas being overgrazed. Where possible, this is a recommendation rather than a strict requirement. Where possible, we would prefer to avoid woodland grazing in spring and summer, because that allows then the ground flora, that important ground flora, to grow and flower within the woodlands. Number 10, tree and hedgerow planting opportunity plan. Now, of course, in the past, we've had lots of negative feedback around the proposal for 10% tree cover on each farm. That was an important debate that we had across the industry, but that 10% requirement has gone. The 10% tree cover requirement is no longer part of the scheme. But what we are still encouraging is tree planting where and when appropriate in each farm. So as part of UA10, what we're asking for is that each farmer in the first year that they come into the SFS to complete what we call a planting opportunity plan. So we would like you to consider where on your farm additional tree planting would benefit you and benefit the farm business. So would you benefit from extra shelter belts? Would you benefit from a biosecurity buffer between you and your neighbouring farm? We have more farmers considering or undertaking kind of agroforestry planting patterns where trees are interspersed throughout pasture or throughout arable areas, but you still maintain that pasture or that crop as the main ground cover. I know that Nature Friendly, I know that you've been promoting agroforestry in recent events, but that style of planting is becoming more popular across Wales, I think. So if there's opportunities there for you to consider new shelter belts, agroforestry, maybe there's awkward field corners, maybe there are steep banks covered in bracken with limited value. These are the sorts of areas where you may consider planting in the future. So we're asking you to kind of capture those ideas on what we call the opportunity plan. And then leading on from that, we are asking that at least 0.1 hectares of new planting is undertaken by the end of 2028. You may choose to do that planting through additional grants through Welsh Government. So we have existing woodland planting grants for area planting or for agroforestry. So you may choose to go down that road and get additional funding through our capital grants. That's absolutely fine. You may choose to fund that yourself or to get those trees from other means. It's 0.1 hectares or equivalent 250 trees. So, for example, you may choose to do a bit of agroforestry and then plant an area up, a bit of a mix and match. That's entirely up to you. But we do encourage you to think about where those trees can benefit you, the farmer, and your livestock. The historic environment, on the trees, I meant to say, we do understand that there are scenarios where tree planting is not appropriate. So from an environmental perspective, you wouldn't plant trees on peat bog. You wouldn't plant trees on areas that are recognised as being important for ground nesting birds such as curlew. A tenant farmer, your landlord may not permit you to plant any trees, for example. And of course, what we don't want you to do is to plant up your most productive areas on the farm. That's not what we're looking for at all. So we do understand that there are scenarios where tree planting would be inappropriate. But what we're looking for in the first instance is that opportunity plan to identify where you think that tree planting could be undertaken. And then any planting that's considered appropriate would come on the back of that. On UA11, I'm conscious of the time, sorry, I need to speed up. On UA11, historic environment, again, this won't apply to every farmer if you don't have any known historical features. By historical features, I am talking about things like registered parks and gardens, traditional stone buildings, scheduled monuments, or other unscheduled features. Again, this won't apply to all of you, but if it does apply to you, we're looking for a very light touch approach to managing these historical features. So, for example, if you've got some old hill fort on the mountain, for example, what we see often is that those areas are covered in large areas of gorse. We wouldn't be asked, as part of the universal layer of the scheme, we would not be asking you to clear all that gorse. A, it's quite technical, and B, it'd be quite expensive if it's a big area. So we would not be asking you to clear those big areas. But what we would ask is that once you're in the scheme, that you don't allow that gorse to spread any further. So that's the sort of light touch kind of management that we're looking for on those historic features. The last one there is animal health and welfare. Again, if you're an arable-only farm with no livestock, this won't apply to you. If you don't own any livestock, so for example, if you own the land and you're responsible for all the other management, but you don't have your own livestock and maybe somebody brings sheep in on tack, if you don't own those animals and you are not the registered keeper for those animals, you would not be asked to do the animal health and welfare action. So that action belongs with the owner slash responsible keeper of those animals. The animal health and welfare is broken down into three parts. The first is what we call the animal health improvement cycle. So that's an opportunity to work with the vet to take a prevention is better than cure approach to any livestock issues or potential risks on the farm. I should say, we have animal health standards in this country we can be proud of. This action is not here because we have bad animal health. Again, that could not be further from the truth. We have good standards, but this is an opportunity to take that kind of proactive approach because we never know what's around the corner. I mentioned benchmarking earlier, UA3. As part of your benchmarking, if you are to find that some of your numbers are going in the wrong direction, so increasing levels of mortality, for example, what's underpinning that? Is there something genetic in your flock? Is there something else going on the farm that could be kind of leading to those negative numbers? By using that benchmarking data, working with the vet as part of this animal health improvement cycle, it's an opportunity to try and turn those numbers around, benefit the farm, benefit your livestock, and benefit your efficiency when it comes to your cattle and sheep. So it is designed to benefit you. The second part of the animal health and welfare is around biosecurity. So if you're bringing new animals into the farm, it's effectively a biosecurity risk assessment. So are you asking those questions about where those animals have come from, what the vaccination history or the health history of those animals are? Do you have isolation facilities on the farm or quarantine facilities on the farm? So again, it's a bit of a risk assessment. It's not foolproof, but it's a bit of a risk assessment to reduce the risks of disease coming onto the farm and then spreading once it's on the farm. And then the last bit there of that animal health action is the welfare and condition scoring. So what we do ask is that the person, this action best sits with the person who's most familiar with the livestock. Now that could be yourselves as the business partners. It might be that you have a member of staff or somebody else who is more hands-on and more familiar with the livestock. In that instance, it might be more appropriate for that other person, for that kind of staff member, to do that condition and body scoring. That's absolutely fine. But again, it's designed to monitor things like lameness and to reduce the impacts of that, to improve animal welfare and the well-being of that animal. That was a really quick rattle through of 12 universal actions. Again, I'll reiterate that they won't all apply to everybody, and even the ones that do apply to you, I'm certain that you will not be starting them all from scratch. Just in the last couple of minutes, because I've overrun, I want to touch very quickly on the optional actions. This is the list of the optional themes, as we've called them. So throughout 2026, we will be developing a number of more detailed actions that sit below each of these themes. So the idea being that you use the universal layer of the scheme as the foundation, but then in the optional layer, there will be opportunities to undertake enhanced habitat management, enhanced biosecurity, enhanced woodland management, or soil protection, for example. So I don't have an awful lot of detail with these optional actions at the moment. I wish that we had published this already, but we don't have that information yet. It's being refined currently. We're still working with stakeholders on developing some of this, but we will try and produce this detail as soon as we can in 2026. One or two of them have already been released. For example, I think it was last week we announced support for organic farming maintenance. So that is one of the themes available in the optional layer of the scheme. And those other things will become, more detail will be published on these other themes as the year develops. But I appreciate that you'll want to know that sooner rather than later to kind of help your decision making and to let you make plans for the next couple of years. I should say within these optional actions, these are additional payments over and above the universal layer I've been talking about. And those payments could be a mixture of capital payments for a piece of equipment, for example, or there could be kind of what we call multi-annual payments for managing an area of habitat or an area of woodland. So there'll be a mix and match there, and you can choose which ones are preferable for yourself. And very quickly, this is my last slide. Collaborative actions. These are the three areas of collaboration that we're developing for 2026. I should say that we're not stuck with the optional actions and the collaborative. We're not starting from scratch. A lot of these are existing schemes that we are tweaking or evolving as they move forward. So, for example, we already have some support out there for working across the supply chain, for example, to kind of shorten those supply chains. So community food strategies, more localized processing, for example, is something that we already support, and we'll carry on doing that. On that third one, collaborative landscape scale activity, for example, we have the existing INRS, Integrated Natural Resources Scheme. Over the next couple of years, that INRS will evolve into, that will be folded into the collaborative layer of the SFS. So there'll be much more information available on these optional and collaborative actions over the coming months. Rhys, I will take a breath there. That was a really quick rattle through. Like I say, I can't regurgitate the whole of the 200-page document that we published in July, but hopefully that's given you enough to think about if you weren't up to speed with where you were. I'm happy to explain some things further in more detail. I'm happy to take some questions. As we said at the beginning, I may not have the answer to every single question, and I might have to take some things away. But Rhys, over to you and any questions that we might have.
Brilliant. Diolch, Dave. Thank you very much for that. Really, really appreciate you taking the time to join us this evening. Probably kind of delivering that presentation for the 945th time this year. But no, yeah, we really appreciate it, Dave. And I think you're underselling yourself. You probably could regurgitate that 200-page document.
I probably could, but nobody wants to sit here for that long.
Right. Okay. There are few questions have come in. Contrary to what I said earlier, I have been multitasking and sort of trying to group those questions into themes so that we're kind of avoiding going back and forth. So the first group of questions, kind of regarding eligibility and enrollment into the scheme. So it's a question around kind of management control. So you need full management control of the land for 10 months, kind of implied that is 10 months in a calendar year, so between January and December. And you did mention it in the presentation. But yeah, if a new farm business tenancy does start in April, in the first year, which essentially means that you don't have that 10 months managed control in the first year, and is a perceived barrier then to entering the SFS. Kind of what measures are in place to ensure that those farmers in those situations can access the scheme.
Yeah, I think I touched on it. Thanks, Reese, for the question. I think I touched on it. It's something that it's an active discussion going on at the moment, and we'll need to bring up some further clarity on this. But yeah, if you're in the first year of a multi-year tenancy, and you may not be starting until April, for example, so you don't have quite the 10 months in 2026, we are looking for what kind of exemptions we might need to bring in as part of that. We have to balance flexibility for our important tenant farmers with that assurance that those areas are under kind of management control. So that is something that we do have to balance, and we will have to kind of refine that position a little bit more. I realize that we've used the phrase, what's the phrase? Exclusive occupation. That's been a bit. We could have described that better. So, of course, there's a situation where we have a landlord and a tenant, both with interest on the same piece of land. What we need to be careful of is that not both of those parties are claiming SFS at the same time on the same parcel. Because if both parties, not that it's our position to get between a landlord and their tenant, that is a private matter between the landlord and the tenant. But if, for example, we have a scenario where both parties claim on a particular piece of land, then of course that's a scenario that we have to then investigate a little bit further and find out who the appropriate claimant is for that area.
And yeah, the same goes for a lot of the members of the Nature Friendly Farming Network will own livestock, but not have management control. They'll be sort of essentially on grazing licenses. Kind of, can you give any security to those that kind of essentially do all the management but don't have that management control? Is there a way for them to sort of be rewarded for that work within the scheme?
Again, it's not our place. We are not the land agent for all the individual agreements across Wales, so we can't get involved in the middle of that. I would say for your license, your members who access land on license, have they claimed BPS previously? Are they the ones who are undertaking activity, or do they have the ability to undertake activities like the soil testing or the habitat management or in control of the hedge grazing regime? So that comes down to the individual circumstances. Sorry, I think my dogs are about to start barking. If as an individual if as an individual they do have control over those aspects, then again you may be eligible to claim the SFS. But it will boil down to those personal circumstances. We're not really in a position to be able to comment on those individual circumstances, I'm afraid.
Okay, thanks for that, Dave. So a question on data confirmation. A couple of questions. So if a farmer hasn't completed their data confirmation, will there be an opportunity later on when they're filling in their SAF to complete it? And on a similar theme, hedgerows aren't included currently in the data confirmation exercise. Will they be at some point, to make sure that this is all correct in time for the SFS?
So if everyone's not familiar with what we mean by the data confirmation exercise, via your RPW online accounts, we ran this data confirmation exercise, and we've done a few rounds of it now, and the last round closed at the end of October. That was a mechanism for you to confirm what areas of habitat and woodland you had on the farm. We know that our habitat data is not complete. So we took a series of different bits of data. So if you were previously in Glastier, for example, we've combined that with various other data sets and some aerial imagery, and we produced the best version of the habitat cover for your farm that we were able to produce. But we know that there were errors in it, or there were gaps in it. So the purpose of the activity was to let you as individuals to confirm on a field by field basis whether something was the habitat that we thought it was, or to say that it wasn't the habitat that we thought it was. If you did not have a chance to do that by the end of October, don't worry. We had to close it at the end of October so that we could take a snapshot, so that we could start processing all that data in readiness for the SAF early next year. But if you didn't do it by the end of October, you haven't missed anything. You will still be able to do it as part of your SAF. So look out for that in March, April, May. But what I would recommend is that if you didn't do the data confirmation exercise, it does mean that your SAF might be that little bit more complex. So leave the time to do it. Please don't leave it till the last minute before the SAF deadline, and make a start on that, as earlier rather than later when your SAF becomes available. But you haven't missed anything yet at all. So please don't worry about that. What it does mean is that you don't have the exact confirmed numbers for whether you've got your 10% or not. So you may have a good grasp of whether you do or don't, or you might think you're quite marginal. If you're marginal, then again, until you do that data confirmation element, you won't be certain, but you haven't missed anything yet. And one thing I should have mentioned when it comes to creating habitat, if you are below the 10%, and so you don't have enough habitat to comply with the requirements, and you need to consider things like herbal lays, for example, to make up to your 10%, we understand that won't be there on the 1st of January. So again, if you talk about herbal lays, for example, you will establish that in the spring or summer at the right point in the season to establish a herbal lay. So we understand it won't be there on the 1st of January. You will establish it, but you will need to commit to establishing it at the right time in the season, with a view then to that habitat being in place by the end of the year. So when you come to do your SAF, if you don't have the 10%, I believe there'll be a facility within the SAF to say, I will be doing my herbal lays in fields X, Y, and Z. So that's something to bear in mind when you are doing your SAF in the spring. The other part of the question was on hedgerows. My understanding is, again, I'm not fully au fait with the hedgerow mapping bit, but I believe, again, you'll be able to do that as part of the SAF to declare which hedgerows you're including towards your 10% habitat, if you choose to include your hedgerows towards your 10% habitat. With hedgerows, we're looking for those hedgerows which are at least 3 meters wide by 2 meters tall, or 2 wide by 3 tall, that don't have lots of gaps, and that are that are fenced with at least 3 meters between the two fences. If they were hedgerows that were established under glass tier, so under the earlier days of glass tier, when we were only asking for 2 meters between the fence, that's also fine. But if it's not a glass tier hedge, we are looking for that 3 meter width between the two fence lines to create that kind of slightly wider wildlife corridor. So if you've got hedgerows that fit that description, and you wish to include some of those hedgerows towards your 10%, if you're otherwise short of the 10%, you'll be able to kind of, again, notify us of that information as part of your SAF.
Cool. Thank you. It's 1 minute to 8, but there are quite a few questions to go through. If you're happy to extend by kind of 15-20 minutes, we'll try and go through most of kind of as we can. But the next few questions are around soil. So kind of, I think you alluded to kind of not needing to do any soil testing on habitat land, but am I right in saying that the soil testing applies to land that also receives organic manure as well as kind of your sort of your chemical application? So could that mean having to test on habitat land, for example, hay meadows, where you might be able to apply farmyard manure?
Okay, yeah. So there is a slightly grey area there, admittedly. So yes, what we've said is, and sorry if I misled, it was not my intention to mislead. So yes, so soil testing on areas that have received or may receive natural or artificial inputs or lime. So yes, if you've got hay meadows with a bit of muck going on your farm, probably better to be safer than sorry and include those areas in the testing. I say probably safer. Sorry, that's not a very helpful. That's not definitive. That's not very helpful. As part of the, I mentioned earlier on, there's another document to be published by the end of this year around things like compliance and inspections. What I think is going to be included in that document as well is some additional information. So, for example, what is the exact soil testing regime? So I've mentioned the pK, magnesium, pH, soil organic matter. I've mentioned the minimum of 20% per farm per year. There will be, it's my understanding, there'll be some additional details to confirm some of those kind of more nuanced areas in this document that we're publishing in December. So apologies for being a little bit vague on that one. But yes, if you are putting on muck, so yes, organic inputs, then yes, that would be included in the testing regime.
Thanks for the clarification. And does the soil testing have to include a report, or is just testing the results okay? And kind of what does that mean for kind of the cost? I guess is to compile a report with recommendations. Is that cost kind of borne by the farmer, or is it kind of part of the payment, if you like?
What we're looking for is the results, the test results per field parcel. I tried to reassure people earlier that things like benchmarking, things like the animal health plan, for example, that's not information that we intend to collect as part of the universal layer. The soil testing results are a slight anomaly there. We will be asking you to feed in the results of the soil testing per field parcel as part of the on your RPW online account. The reason we ask for those soil test results to be fed in is that's a really valuable piece of data for different elements of our environmental monitoring programs. What we will not be doing is using those soil test results to identify individual farms. We will not be using those soil test results to look for issues of non-compliance. So please let me reassure you that we will not be doing anything kind of underhand with those soil testing results, but we are asking you for you to feed in those results per parcel going forward. If you've done your soil testing prior to coming into the scheme, I don't think we're asking you to go back and retrospectively populate all that testing data from previously, but any testing that you do going forwards, we would ask you to feed that in. Sorry, Reese, your question was, is the costing to cover the results, or is the cost designed to cover reports and recommendations? My understanding is that the costings that we've included are to match the results that we've asked for. So it's just the results that we're looking for, is my understanding.
But I'm assuming there will be sort of advice available, to act on the test.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Soil testing results by themselves are no good if you don't know how to interpret that data. So if you're familiar with soil testing results and you know how to use that information, that's great. If you're new to soil testing and you don't know how to use that information, then again, through Farming Connect, etc., we'll be making support available.
Brilliant. There's quite a technical question here on kind of testing for soil organic matter. Basically, the question is kind of whether it matters kind of how that organic matter is sort of calculated, if you like, whether it's the loss on ignition approach or the DUMAS testing protocol. Quite a technical question, I appreciate, but sort of
I'm not familiar with that level of detail, I'm afraid, that technical detail.
But we can take that offline potentially. There's a few questions on CPDP. So, for example, look at the inner scheme. If a group of graziers on common land want to get together to have a collaborative tick control strategy for the sheep, can they count this towards UA4 CPDP as part of becoming like a discussion group? And also UA12, the AHIC animal health improvement cycle. So that'll be kind of working with vets to monitor the ticks to reduce diseases.
I'm not sure I fully understood the question there. So certainly things like animal health and welfare, improvements for animal health as a subject matter, that would certainly count towards CPD. And again, a healthier animal reduces the need for medication. A healthier animal reduces less carbon. So, for all sorts of reasons, a healthier animal gives us those multiple benefits, as well as the more productive animal itself. In terms of from the CPD perspective, one of the jobs we're doing at the moment is trying to draw up some parameters. So if you're going to do your CPD through Farming Connect, that's fine, and we support that. We appreciate that lots of farmers will not want to use Farming Connect, and of course, Farming Connect is only a finite resource itself. So we do want to make it available for other learning providers and other information providers to be involved in this kind of CPD space. So at the moment, all sorts of organisations, including Nature Friendly, are asking us, what standards do they have to go through so for their bit of learning to count towards CPD. Again, that is something that we need to refine, but we're looking for CPD
We lost Dave.
else absolutely fits into that space. So that would discussion groups and groups of farmers
Sorry,
working together.
Dave. We missed you for about 10 seconds there.
Oh,
I don't know
okay.
whether you want to kind of just reiterate the tail end of that answer. I think you were alluding to sort of, kind of looking beyond Farming Connect as the sole provider of,
Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
yeah.
Apologies. I'll rewind. So yes, looking beyond Farming Connect as a sole provider because they don't have the facilities to do this for every farm in Wales. So other learning providers, if they're providing learning on things like animal health, around tick prevention or eradication, working on common land, groups of farmers working collaboratively to eradicate or to reduce animal disease. For me, that sounds absolutely like the sort of thing that would be eligible towards the CPD. But what we do need to do is to draw up some parameters for those organisations outside of Farming Connect who are delivering that kind of learning to make sure we've got some to make sure there is some kind of robust standards in there.
For example, the Nature Friendly Farming Network.
Exactly. So so Nature Friendly will be interested in this. We've spoken to the unions, some other organisations like HCC, for example. So there are lots of organisations that want to get involved in this, and there's lots of other people out there providing kind of learning. It's all valuable stuff. We just want to make sure that there is some kind of consistency across that space to make sure that it's all going in the right direction.
That's great. Yeah, and just to mention that we do have a data sharing agreement, the network with Farming Connect. So if you do attend any NFFN training events, your Farming Connect store of Sgilia or skill store is kind of automatically updated to reflect that. So another reason to join. Why not? A question on, well, another one on CPDP actually. Kind of why is it limited to business partners only? I'm not a partner in my family farm, but play a key role in the day-to-day management. Parents are in their 80s, and kind of would be less likely to do the CPDP. Does it count for the farm worker?
The way we've done it at the moment is that it's only for the farm business partners. So the scenario that member there has just outlined is we've heard that quite a bit. We've kept it with the farm partners for the business partners for now. This next thing I'm about to say, Reese, you definitely can't record this bit, so nobody has formally heard me saying this. But of course, things like the SAF, that is all done online these days. Maybe you use an agent, maybe you do it yourselves, or with the assistance of another family member. But we are going more towards that kind of online kind of record keeping. We have been moving in that direction for a number of years. The bit that I can't formally advise you on is that we don't necessarily know who's sitting at the computer pressing the buttons. So like I say, the formal requirement sits with the business partner. If there is somebody else sitting next to them on the computer or somebody else pressing the buttons, we can't know that. So again, that is, that sits within the family, sits within their kind of private arrangements. It's designed to be sitting with the business partners so that the benefit of that CPD sits with the active members of the business partnership. Now, if there are, it's a different conversation, I suppose. It's a much different conversation to the CPD conversation that we're having about, we do support succession planning. So for kind of multi-generational family farm businesses, have they considered their succession plan? Do they need to restructure the business? If there are other family members involved in the business, that's for individuals to consider, but we do recommend that succession planning kind of aspect. Again, that is different to the question being asked, but that might be something that individual farm businesses might need to think about going forwards. But ultimately, like I say, it's designed to benefit the people responsible for the business, hence it sits with the business partners.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Question on designated sites. So yeah, I try to be proactive, and I've approached NRW kind of wanting a farm visit, walk and talk on our hill, which is designated as soon as possible. The response I got was that they're waiting for Welsh Government for kind of standardised guidance on how to approach this. Do you know when that guidance will be available and when NRW will be able to come out and do a bit of a walkover on site with farmers? And the second question regarding Section 16 management agreements, will the SFS be the main vehicle for managing triple SIs on farmland? Does that mean that Section 16s are essentially kind of abolished or kind of redundant on farmland?
I'll answer the second one first. I think it is the intention that that triple SI support would be, sorry, funding support on triple SI on farmland will SFS will become the main vehicle for that. As you say, that is absolutely the intention. But we know that not every farmer will come into SFS. Not every farmer goes into any scheme. So not every farmer went into BPS. Not every farmer went into Glassdoor. So I think NRW will probably have to retain the facility for supporting triple SIs on those farms that don't come into SFS. But if the farm does come into SFS, I think it's the intention there for the SFS to become that kind of supporting mechanism. In terms of when we will have more detailed information on that kind of process for how NRW will prioritize sites or when they'll start visiting sites, I can't give you a date for when that will come out. Of course, we want that process to start as early as possible. But what we won't know, I think it's fair to say, even though the scheme starts on the 1st of January, we won't know who comes into SFS until those SAFs have been submitted in May. So we won't know until the summer which farms are in and which farms are out of SFS. So there's that kind of time delay as well for knowing which farms will be in the scheme. But certainly people will be keen to get kind of going on this process as soon as possible. So I understand the requirement from yourself to be clear on that as soon as possible, but I can't give you a date at the moment for when that information will be available. I should say on that UA7, the requirement for the designated site management plan for members on the call who aren't familiar, whereas most of the other requirements in the scheme for the universal actions fit within the calendar year, so we look for them to be done in the most part within 2026. This requirement for the designated site management plan is separate. The deadline for requiring that is 2030. And that is based on the fact that there is only so much capacity within NRW to work through all the farms, all the designated sites across Wales. So that can't happen all in one season. It'll need to be spread out over the next couple of years. So please, if you do have a designated site on your farm and you're anxious that you are falling non-compliant with the scheme requirement, we have got that 5-year lead-in time to 2030. So hopefully that's reassuring to people.
Cool. Thank you. A few questions on trees. Whilst we welcome the flexibility that the 10% tree requirement has been removed, and we've as a network we've always pushed for kind of really thinking about planting the right tree in the right place. Whilst a lot of farmers will see that as a win, I think some farmers who have been proactive since the 10% announcement and gone about to plant trees on their farm in preparation for the SFS and a smoother entry. A lot of farmers then have essentially done all this. They thought about where they want to plant. In this instance, farmers saying planted over 1,000 trees in the last few years. I kind of don't really want to plant or don't have really the space to plant anymore. Kind of puts those farms at a bit of a disadvantage because I think whether you alluded to or not, but it does mention it in the consultation that 0.1 hectares must be planted, which is essentially 250 trees. So those farmers it's a bit of a kick in the teeth, I guess, for those farmers who have been proactive. Is there any leeway, if farmers have planted a considerable amount of trees in the last couple of years, 5 years, whether they kind of satisfy the requirements?
So on that one, yes, it's the requirement that you plant 0.1 hectares or equivalent to 250 trees by the end of 2028, or even if you haven't planted by the end of 2028, if you have a application in for funding for planting by the end of that planting season, i.e. March 2029, that's what we're looking for. However, to answer your question, Reese, for this 0.01 hectares, we've set the clock ticking retrospectively. So that clock started ticking on the 1st of April 2022. So any farmer who's been planting trees on their land since April 2022, those trees will count towards their progress of their 0.1 hectares. And if they've done more than that, brilliant. If they've done 0.01 in the last 3 years, great. But yeah, to reassure anybody, I should have mentioned it, that yeah, that clock started ticking April 22.
Okay, that's yeah, that is reassuring. But I assume the requirements to produce the opportunity map is there, but if they've planted the 0.1 hectares since
Yeah,
2022, then that is fine.
yeah, so they might already be ahead of the curve in terms of the planting, and I hope that does reassure. But yes, the requirement for the opportunity plan is still there. What we're trying to do, we've moved away from the 10%, but we are still encouraging tree planting where and when appropriate. So even if you've done your 0.1, for example, if as part of your kind of ongoing thinking, you think, oh, I'd benefit from another shelter belt over there, or I'd benefit from planting up that awkward field corner. If there are other opportunities that you might benefit from where more trees beyond the 0.1 could be planted, it's kind of that process is there to kind of, just to generate those ideas and get farmers thinking about where additional planting benefits may be possible. And the other thing to mention is that the opportunity plan, we ask for it to be done in the first year of the scheme, but on the understanding that is probably something that needs to be kept live over the coming years. So if you buy more land, for example, there could be, on a year-on-year basis, if you buy more land, as you take on additional land, you might find then kind of additional opportunities to plant on that additional land. So again, that plan, we ask that plan to be done and for it to be kept live going forwards.
Thank you. And then I guess yeah, the timeline then for funding, that'll go mainly through the option layer and current existing schemes to be supported to plant those trees.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's no capital funding in the universal layer of the scheme. If you choose to do your tree planting with Welsh Government support, that's additional grant available. And effectively, it's one of those schemes that's already available now. If farmers wanted to kind of apply for tree planting, well, they're ongoing. I'm not sure whether they're open right at this minute, but those existing mechanisms that we've already had out there, effectively, they will fall into the optional layer of the scheme. So there'll be additional funding for that.
And just to clarify, because it was something I had to check the other day, um, hedgerow trees do not count towards the 250 trees. Am I right in saying that? Or the hedgerow itself, because essentially, if you then planted 35 meters of hedgerow at 7 saplings per meter, then you will have had planted 250 trees. But I think from the Welsh Government guidance, the hedgerows do not count. Am I right
Uh,
in that?
uh, yes and no. So hedgerow does not count. So we say 0.1 hectares or equivalent to 250 trees. There isn't an equivalent measurement of hedgerow that also equates to that. So you're right in as much as hedgerows don't contribute towards that 0.1 hectares or the 250 trees. What we have said is that if as part of your existing hedgerows or new hedgerows that you're planting, if you're allowing trees to grow up within those hedges, so above the profile of the hedge itself, if you're letting kind of some standard trees to grow up as new standard trees, they can count towards your 250 trees if they're new trees that you're allowing or new trees that you're establishing.
Cool. Thank you. A question on habitat, particularly on upland open habitat and the grazing requirements. And I better ask this question because I think it's my brother who's asked it. It's around kind of essentially extending the the summer grazing season until the end of October. And just to provide a bit of context, sort of we will gather our ewes at the end of August and pick the draft ewes to sell. The remaining ewes, which are essentially the kind of breeding flock for the next year, will then go back onto the hill and kind of in my neck of the woods in Meirionnydd, they will usually stay there until the end of October, just prior to tupping, which is kind of where we're farming at the beginning of November, really. So I think that's where that question is coming from, that it kind of it would hamper quite a lot of upland farmers to have that kind of maximum stocking rate extended into October essentially. So is there any leeway there?
I'm just sorry, I'm quickly scanning our guidance document as to when that period, what the dates are on that grazing period are.
I think it's grazing with a minimum level of 0.04 livestock units per hectare between April and the 30th of September. So there are
Yeah.
no maximum stocking rates during that kind of summer kind of April to September. But that kind of maximum level of 0.2 livestock unit per hectare kind of kicks in the 1st of October. So it's a question whether that could be extended basically to
Um,
October, and the winter grazing requirement starts from the 1st of November.
yeah. So uh, so certainly I'm in no position at the moment to say that yes or no that that kind of derogation or exemption is available. I don't have that ability to make that decision, but it's something that I can take away and ask about what levels of flexibility there are. The reason that we have those seasonal uh, uh, the reason that we have those dates, the reason that we have a maximum grazing rate for the winter, is that what we want to avoid is upland areas that are very wet, particularly on peat, that they don't get poached and all churned up and damaged in wet winter weather. Now, you know, on an individual farm holding, on an individual year that has a very dry autumn, you might want to make the case for that there would be minimal damage to the ground conditions if the stock stayed on there for an extra month. Like I say, that's not something I've got the ability to make a decision on, but it is something now we'll take away to see if it's something that could potentially fall into the into the into the into the bracket of derogations, for
Well,
example, if the ground conditions are
yeah,
not such that damage would be.
yeah. I get, yeah. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, that'd be great. And I guess the flip side is that having the live, if it is wet conditions, having the livestock spread out on a bigger sort of mountain area might kind of potentially be better than them being concentrated on the smaller in by land, particularly if it's a particularly wet year. Um,
Yeah.
just a question on enforcement and monitoring. So, what's the approach to monitoring enforcement? Obviously, there's a lot of requirements here. How a Welsh government or how a farmers going to having to demonstrate that they've complied. What's the approach to inspections really? What is a percentage of farms that will be visited during the year? How much of it will be sort of done remotely? And is there kind of earned recognition for those farmers who are kind of, constantly meeting the requirements year in, year out with no issues?
So there's a few elements to this answer, and I might need to start wrapping up after this one, Reese. Sorry, but there are a few elements to this answer. Firstly, in terms of the scheme administration, I know we've had lots of negative feedback from farmers thinking that they're going to be stuck at their desks constantly doing all the paperwork to comply with the scheme. We've got, we've got the RPW online platform that people are very familiar with already, and that's well received across the industry. And we are trying to adapt that platform to be as user friendly and as efficient as possible. And we do quite a lot of work with stakeholders and with farmers to make sure that those processes are as efficient as possible. What we want to do is to make that data confirmation, sorry, not the data confirmation on the mapping I talked about earlier, but so that an individual farmer can report the elements, the report that they've complied with each universal action. Try to make that quite straightforward. In many instances, this will be a declaration. So a farmer can declare that they've done their benchmarking, for example, through their dairy contract. We're not asking for all that benchmarking information to be fed in. What we would say, or what we do say, is that even though you can declare to say that you've done it, and we'll take your word that you've done it, should you be selected for an inspection, you will then be asked to supply the evidence there. So we are saying to all farmers, keep your records for at least 5 years should you be called for an inspection. But like I say, we are not collecting all that information in. The farmer should retain it in their records, and we are looking to make that kind of process of confirmation as straightforward and as streamlined as possible. But there is a flip side to that. If Hugh Morgan was here. Hugh Morgan is our head of Rural Payments Wales. The way he describes this is that we're trying to develop a more pragmatic, more partnership approach with farmers across Wales. We've got the ability to move away from the very, very, very rigid inspection and penalty criteria we've been obliged to use in the past. So going forward, given that there is a lot of change, given that there'll be a lot of farmers undertaking things like habitat management or benchmarking that have never done it before, for example. What we want to do, where possible, is if on inspection, for example, if a farmer has not quite done the full job or done something slightly wrong, if no damage has taken place, if nothing serious has happened, is there some flexibility there to say, right, take the time, here's a bit of advice and here's a bit of guidance, rectify this or that, and we won't go straight to a penalty. We will always need to retain the ability to inspect. We will always need to retain the ability to apply financial penalties, because we do still have occasionally, we still do get instances of severe breaches where land has been damaged or there are livestock welfare issues, for example. So we always need to have that ability to apply a financial penalty. But in the first instance, because it's a big change, we are trying to adopt that approach of an advisory, a bit of guidance first before going straight for the financial penalty. I do appreciate if you've had a negative experience in the past with Welsh Government inspections, it might take a while for people to start. People might need to see that happening before they take our word for it. But certainly that is something that we're working towards over the coming years.
Cool. Thank you, Dave. If I can ask one, this will be the final question because it's on the theme, kind of, of the optional collaborative layers. I think we've almost gone through every single one. There might be one or two that I've missed. But essentially, the question, kind of, when can we expect the payment rates for the optional and collaborative actions, and kind of what is the process in applying for the optional collaborative layers? Will it follow a similar process to what we have now with small grants, kind of pollinators, environment, growing for the environment, and is it a competitive process? Are we working on the assumption that if you're in the universal layer, then it's an automatic enrolment of sorts?
So I can't fully answer this question, Reese. I'm sorry, and I apologise to the person who's asked the question and everybody else on the call as well. Some optional stuff is still being refined as we speak, and I don't have the answers to all those individual questions, but they are all, everything you just mentioned is important, and we need to be as clear on those different issues as soon as we can, because farmers want to know what's available, and they want to know, they want to be able to plan, and they want to know what opportunities are available to them. So I will start with an apology that I don't have the answers to those questions, but we do need to try and make that information available as soon as we can. I should say that when we talk about the optional layer, that will involve some things which are brand new, but it will involve some things which are part of existing schemes, and we'll roll them forward. So things like tree planting, things like small grants you've mentioned, or there'll be elements there to the small grants, and some of the larger infrastructural things as well. Some of those will be a continuation, albeit there might be some evolution or some tweaking needed, but there will be some familiarity there that farmers will see as we start rolling out more of these optional things as part of the SFS. What we also need to be clear on is which of those elements of the optional layer are only available to those farmers inside SFS, and some things which might still be generally available to farmers even though they don't come into SFS. Again, I can't go into detail on that at the moment, but there's something that we will need to be clear about. So, for example, honestly, it's not all about trees. I absolutely, I mean that it's not all about trees, but it's an easy example to go by. There are other people out there who are not farmers, who will not otherwise be eligible for the SFS, but we are encouraging tree planting across Wales in other scenarios where tree planting is applicable. So it's likely, I think, that the tree planting grants will be available to anybody, whether they're in SFS or not, but there will be some elements that are probably only available to those farmers who are in SFS, and that is something else we need to be clear on. But again, I will apologise with the fact that we don't have all that information yet. I appreciate it's frustrating, and yes, we're working to get that out as soon as we can.
Thank you. And Yeah, you'll know that. I'll probably remind you about that question in a month's time if we haven't heard anything.
Every time we speak over the next coming months, Reese, I'm sure you'll nag me on it.
Right, I think we'll draw it to a close there. Thank you very much, Dave. Diolch o galon. Yeah, you worked overtime this evening. You've earned your keep. So yeah, thank you very much. Really appreciate you taking your time. Thank you everyone for asking such good questions. Yeah, the downside of asking so many questions is that we've overrun by half an hour, but really appreciate everyone's input, especially yours, Dave. So diolch o galon. Thank you.
Diolch. Bye bye, everyone.